Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Geological Society of London, and to this, the 6th Society London Lecture of 2018, which has been designated Year of Resources. By way of introduction to me, my name is Leaf Carroll. I'm a fellow and chartered geologist, so long-standing member of the Geological Society. Just stood down as a council member and former professional secretary, and I still sit on the professional committee. And I'm very happy to call Bellington House one of my homes. Today's lecture is entitled Gemstones and Jewellery, Ethical Resources, ? And it is my great pleasure to introduce my old friend, our speaker, Callie Oldershaw, geologist, gemmologist and earth science education consultant, author of many books and former parliamentary liaison officer of this society. The 1990s film Blood Diamond raised the issue of using the high value and transportability of diamonds to support guerrilla activities and drug barons, leading to a crisis of confidence in the jewellery industry and the mining industry, in fact. In response, the jewellery industry introduced initiatives aimed at ensuring the traceability and transparency of diamond trading in the chain of custody from mine to market, including the Kimberley process, which is laser marking of diamonds, and most recently, the De Beers Group Gem Fair programme, which aims to create a secure and transparent route to market for ethically sourced, artisanal and small-scale mined diamonds. The diamond industry has been one of the first to embrace blockchain technology, which, for those of you who don't know, it's basically a digital ledger, which with every subsequent piece of the ledger or entry to the ledger is encrypted by the previous piece, so you can't actually change the sequence of it without it being very obvious that you've changed the sequence of it, hence the ability to track the provenance of gemstones, diamonds, or any other commodity or item that you wish to. Might this be the way forward in making the chain of custody transparent across the value chain and be diamond mining's answer to Bitcoin, or maybe synthetic diamonds will be the way forward? To help answer these and other questions, we welcome Callie Oldershaw. Callie is an examiner for the Gemmology Association of Great Britain, GEM-A, and was their First Lady Chair. She was curator of gemstones at the Natural History Museum for 13 years, before moving here as Education and Parliamentary Liaison Officer. Callie arranged more than 100 talks and several day conferences in her role as Administrative Secretary for All-Party Parliamentary Group for Earth and Environmental Sciences, established to educate and inform members of Parliament about key environmental issues. Currently, Callie is developing jewellery herself, made from Cornish agate, all locally and ethically sourced and accredited by the Made in Cornwall scheme. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Callie Oldershaw.
Leaf, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to set this laptop again because it's decided to sleep, which I hope none of you will. I need 2 hands to do the password. I've got 2 clickers, so I couldn't do it without putting them down, so please excuse me. Right, we're back in business. I'm Callie Oldershaw. I've worked in a number of places, as you can see there. I've put the Natural History Museum on the left, and in the middle, the House of Commons, or Parliament. And tonight, I'm going to be talking about the sourcing ethical jewellery. So I'm going to be mentioning gold and diamonds and some coloured gemstones as well. And in the trade, the diamonds and the coloured gemstones are generally seen as 2 different parts. So how did I get to this position, first of all? Well, no, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little more about what I'm going to put in the talk. I'm going to be talking about the terminology, because what we've found is so many people are confused, and I hope by the end of this talk you'll know very clearly what the difference is between ethical fair trade as one word, with a capital F, which is a trademark, and fair trade as 2 words. I'm going to talk about the supply chain from the mine to the market, and it's very complex, so I'm really only going to sort of dip in and out for a few parts of it, because of its complexity and because I don't want to confuse, because I'm talking, as I said, about gold diamonds and coloured stones. And each one has a different route and quite a complex route. But along that route, where is it and how is it that we lose the transparency and possibly the confidence in knowing where and how these stones have reached us? So I'm going to mention some of the issues and the challenges along the way. Leif has mentioned Bitcoin and blockchain, and I'll mention some of the other developments. And then at the end, I'm going to leave you with a few questions that you might ask of yourself and of others. For example, if you go into a jeweller's, there are questions you might ask them. And then at the end, we'll have a few questions that you can ask me. And if I can't answer them, then I have various people planted around the audience who are experts in different parts of this chain, the supply chain. So I worked at the Geological Museum back in the 80s and then moved across to the Natural History Museum. Little has changed in the many years since it opened in 1881. If you look carefully, the only real difference is these end pieces have been blocked in. But my job looking at all these gemstones, I was often asked, well, what is your favourite gemstone? And my answer, it changes regularly. Like I go through times when I like something purple or something green or something blue. But usually, and most often, my favourite is emerald. And in the museum, we have fantastic, really wonderful specimens. And this one in the middle here, small but perfectly formed. It's an emerald crystal. It's only about an inch high. This is how it looks when it comes out of the ground, how it has been mined. It's in a white rock, a calcite, and it's come out, and that is how it looks when it comes out of the ground. It hasn't had anything done to it yet. It's got 6 sides and flat at top and bottom. The next step, you take that stone and you take it through to polish it. Facet is the word we use when we shape it with the different flat faces on it. The middle at the bottom there is actually called an emerald cut in that way because it's quite a brittle stone and the corners can get knocked off. So it's an octagonal, it's got 8 sides, and the corners have been cut off on purpose during that design. So there's a lot of science, a lot of optics, there's a lot of things go into actually designing the shape of the stones. So I spent a lot of years looking at that part of the supply chain, going from the mineral itself through to the cut gemstone, and occasionally to the stone set in gold, silver, or platinum. There aren't many pieces of jewellery in the Natural History Museum. Most of them are over in the V&A, is where you associate the jewellery with, but there are some pieces. But having worked for years with that part, I started to think more about, well, what about at either end of that story? Because that isn't the full story. The full story from mine to market. Right, well, that one's given up its ghost. As I said, there are lots of different parts to it, but really what you're doing is you're taking the stone and you're getting it from the ground and you're getting it into the shop. Along the way, exploration, extraction. That's finding it and getting it out. LSM and ASM, and I'll tell you more of those as we go through the talk. LSM are the large-scale mines and miners, and I'm sure you're aware of some of these photographs you see of satellite pictures of mines that you can see from outer space. Google Earth, they are such an obvious feature on the planet. ASMs are the artisanal and small-scale mines, and I'll tell you more about those as well. So mining those rough gems, and by rough, that's before they've been faceted. So what they look like when they come out of the ground, they're rough, and metals I'm going to mention. And then the transformation. Exporting them first out of the country of origin. How do we do that? And I'm going to mention the certification, the Kimberley process. Then they're sorted, they're graded, traded. Next, to the jewellers. So we've got different groups of people all the way along this chain. The cutting and the polishing. And also with the gold, refining the gold and getting it to the end where you've got a piece that you can then sell, a piece of jewellery. So that's the way that these travel. So you can see that when I was at the museum, I was just doing the little middle bit. So there's the start and the end. And I was asked to give talks about emeralds, and also I did some work at the Kingston University about minerals and mining. and got more interested in what is happening at either end. And at the beginning then, looking at pictures like this one, this is a picture of the Muso mine in Colombia, in South Africa, southern America, South America. And you can see, I hope, that in this picture, there are these vehicles. They look like small vehicles, but each one of these is larger than a double-decker bus. And what they're doing is they're transporting this dark material which has white lines in it. And the white lines in there are the white calcite veins, the lines of white calcite that have the emeralds within them. This whole side of the mountain has been taken off. Some of it has been washed down into the rivers down here. Some of it they will take in their trucks and they'll take them to be processed. Gemstones can occur, well, they occur in the ground, but they can be washed out in this way. So you can either find gemstones in the rock in which they occur, or you can find them washed out, deposited elsewhere, eroded, transported. So on this picture, you can see quite clearly, as I've mentioned them, the veins, this soft black rock, the harder veins of white with the emeralds, and then down here, this area where the riverbed is. And what caught my eye were these little speckles, lots of little speckles in the river. What are they? Well, looking closer, what those speckles are is they're people. Hundreds of people having a very difficult life, scrabbling around in the riverbed in the dark, dirty shales, which is a very soft, mud-like rock. And that's how they look. So that started me thinking, well, what is it like? What is the life like for these artisanal miners? And what is ethical? What does ethical mean? If you Google ethical, you get this definition: being in accordance with the rules or standards for right conduct or practice, especially the standards of a profession. So looking at it at the mining profession or the jeweller's profession, the jewellery profession, what is right conduct or practice? Pertaining to right and wrong in conduct, what is right? And what I thought when I was thinking about this was, we all know really right from wrong. We know right from wrong when we're quite young children. In the playground, you know if it's right, if you're breaking the rules of a game. You know if it's wrong to push somebody over. And if you're in that position and you know something has been done wrong, generally what you'll think is, it's not fair. And this is the connection, I think, between ethical, right and wrong, and fairness. And we all know that feeling of, it's not fair. Is it fair for those people to be down there, or is it not? Maybe for them, that's their livelihood. That is fair, or that isn't fair. So when we talk about ethical, we're also using this word fair quite often. I did some work in 2010 with a pioneer of ethical jewellery, Greg Valerio, and we came up with this one, doing some work for the NAG, National Association of Goldsmiths, and funded by others, including the FJA. I'll mention some of these acronyms later on. But having the intention to improve social and environmental consequences of the jewellery industry, and doing so by introducing incremental steps or benchmarks to document the ethical improvements. It may or may not be actually linked to auditable standards, so you can't really check sometimes that what you've done has made a change, but you know that you've made a step in the right direction. You feel it's fairer, you feel it's ethical. So that's what ethical really is. It's making these little steps in the right direction that might not always be checkable, auditable. And moving on to fair trade, that must be auditable because it's a specific model, and it's it's attached to, so I'm just looking at the fair trade and the fair trade, and I don't want to confuse you about the fair trade, but fair trade, when you're talking about fair trade and you want to be fair, what you're doing there is you're tackling poverty. You want to make it better for those people who are doing the mining themselves. usually the artisanal, the small-scale miners, but also it works in communities who are involved in an area with mining. So there's a lot of knock-on areas as well, but making it fair for them, and often, as I said, they're in the poorest countries of the world. So that's fair trade, giving something back, making sure that the people who are involved are getting something better out of it. But fair trade is not the same as fair trade as one word with a capital letter, which is the trademark. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, will recognise this logo. The fair trade logo, if you've been to any supermarket, you will have seen this. Now, 4,500 products have this little logo on them. They're stamped with this fair trade trademark in the UK supermarkets, and they are part of an ethical trading scheme that is audited, and it has particular rules, and you have to pay a fee to be accepted. So you have to have your business checked. Does it fulfill their criteria? And then having paid and fulfilled their criteria, only then can you use this little sticker or the logo. And part of the thing they do is these two main things, is the guaranteeing a minimum price for growers and giving a premium to invest in community. So it is very much about getting money back into the community. The Fairtrade was set up 1992, so that's over 25 years ago. Now there are bananas there. It also covers things like sugar, tea, coffee, chocolate, but also gold can have a fair trade as well. Gold mining accounts for 10 to 15 million people, and it is the largest employer in the mining industry. The difference between these small minings, the artisanal miners, and the large, the small mining produce 15% of the global gold, but they make up as much as 90% of the labour force in the gold industry. But the large-scale miners, about 2 million people, but they produce more than 80% of the gold. So most of the gold is coming from the large scale, but far more people are involved in the small scale. Now, the loss of traceability, by that I mean when you're going through the supply chain, where is it that you say, well, I can no longer be sure that it's gone from one step to another? And in gold, generally what happens in gold is you get the gold together, you package it together, and then it goes off to the refinery. And at that stage, it's melted down, and although you might know who it's come from or what area it's come from, you may not know exactly which mine, or even closer down, sort of even sometimes which locality area. And batches may be mixed together. So somebody might own several mines, or they might buy up gold from different mines and have them refined at the same time, but not always. Because fair trade gold from certified miners, the ASMs, the artisanal small-scale miners, if you can show that they meet the fair trade standards, so you always have to pay up front, as I say, make sure you meet their standards, agree with their standards, and get the fair trade gold and now the fair trade silver logos as well, to show that it's been mined responsibly and processed, extracted as well, responsibly. What does responsibly mean? Well, in this case, it means following their guidelines. The money that goes back, the premium that is paid, supports the mining communities, and it can do this in a number of ways. Sometimes it'll be building a school, helping with the hospitals, but what is also very much on their list is the people who are involved. Avoiding child labour, making sure that the youngsters, and in some countries, children are defined as being under 15, but in some areas, children as young as 7 or 8 are working in these environments. And in some areas, even there are families where they'll bring the children along with them, even when they're toddlers or newborns strapped to the backs as well. The picture on the right there is a child, not fully grown yet, but So the spine not fully grown, carrying a very heavy weight. And this is part of it, is youngsters getting awful problems with their backs because of carrying too much weight. On the left, processing, collecting, and when I put on the top there, mercury and cyanide, one of the things about gold, not every gold mine, but most gold mines, is that when the gold is collected by gold panning, for example, you need to separate the gold and collect it into one area. Now, panning does that to a certain extent because gold is heavy and it'll settle more than the gravel and the water around it. So you swish the pan around, the gold will settle. In some areas, though, when it's still within the ore, within the rock which it has formed, even though it's been washed or broken down, it might still be within the rock. That rock needs to be crushed, made into a powder, and then the mercury is added, and then you swill it around, and then it's boiled. It's boiled to boil off the mercury, which will then leave the gold. And it's that process that people associate often with the environmental, awful working conditions of youngsters and gold mining. The use of mercury, because mercury is poison, it gets into the bones of the children or the adults, and it can cause problems with breathing as well as memory loss and loss of feeling in the hands, and also with the faces you can get blotches and facial problems as well. So it is quite a nasty stuff to be working with day in, day out, but it is giving people an income. And one of the very first, the very first people, CRED Jewellery, got very much involved, and Greg Valerio, who I've mentioned, was very much an activist and went out, travelled to these places, took photographs, talked to the people there, and started to really push the idea of fair trading and fair mined gold. And that was back in 2003, he sort of got things going. By 2011, FLO is the Fairtrade labelling organisation, so they're the ones who actually give the certification. And ARM, the Alliance for Responsible Mining, got together and they introduced fair trade and fair mined gold. So it has the fair trade logo, but it also has this little logo, which is a mine, fair trade and fair mined gold. Fair Jewellery as well, Fair Jewellery Association, they've also been pushing this, looking at what's fair, looking at what's ethical. How can we improve the life of these people step by step, but also the environment? So it's not just looking at people, it's also looking at place. And even more recently, and we have here a couple, Stuart, who I'll mention again, and Kathy, who are both members of Fair Luxury, not to be called Flux anymore, but Fair Luxury. And they've recognised as well the overlap between the jewellery industry and the fashion industry. And a lot of key issues that are being discussed in fashion. Would you buy something from a sweatshop in the East? Or would you buy something? They're the same sort of questions, both in jewellery and in fashion. So, and the two work together. When they're on the catwalk, you see the model is in beautiful clothing and often wearing beautiful jewellery as well. So these two industries are actually helping one another to cover the ground and try and move things forward. And Fair Luxury do have regular meetings in London now, so if you did want to Google that, there's one coming up fairly soon. So having talked about the supply chain for gold and about fair and fair trade, I'm now going to move on to diamonds and jewellery. So diamonds and other gemstones. Diamonds, personal adornment. Why do we buy diamonds? We buy diamonds as a statement of wealth. We buy them as gifts. I think many of the ladies here, when they get engaged, the expectation is that you will have a diamond engagement ring. Good bit of marketing there it was. But what are diamonds and gemstones? What's the difference between a gemstone and a mineral or a rock? And what we say is gemstones have three attributes: beauty, durability, and rarity. Now, they don't need all three, because there are some stones that are quite rare. They might not be very durable. For example, tanzanite from Tanzania is a blue gemstone. It's only got the hardness on what we call the Mohs scale of scratchability is only a 5.5. It's less than a quartz, which is one of the most common rocks that we know. But it's not nearly as high as rubies and sapphires at 9, or the highest diamond at 10. So it's not a very hard rock, but it's fairly rare. And I think most people who buy it either because they think it's beautiful blue or purpley blue, or because they've listened or read the marketing, which says if you don't buy it now, it's going to run out, so you better buy it now because it's only found in this one place and you'll never be able to buy it again. So a lot about fashion is about how things look, but also fashion is generated by marketing to say this is what you need and you need it now. And if you've got that pressure on you need it and you need it now, are you still asking yourself, but where has it come from and who mined it and what's happening in that country? And this is what really, really hit the headlines, I suppose, and I remember going to the film. Edward Zwick, he was the director, the writer, and he did quite a bit of research into conflict diamonds, called conflict diamonds or blood diamonds because they're associated with funding guerrilla warfare, funding warlords, drugs, and conflict, mainly in African countries, but elsewhere as well. And he homed in on the problems of the 1990s in Sierra Leone, but the war went on more than just the 90s. 120,000 dead, millions homeless. Global Witness, Edward Zwick was very much influenced by the Global Witness report about Angola, which had happened previously, and based his Blood Diamond film a little bit on that. And what happened after that? Sales of diamonds plummeted. People suddenly made that connection. If what I've bought from a jewellery shop, where did it come from? How do I know that it isn't conflict? And do I care? Now, a lot of people, it didn't make a difference. They go in, they buy a diamond, and it doesn't make a difference anyway. But some did feel that it was important to know that it was not related to a conflict, that it was not funding wars and these many thousands of deaths. So Kimberley process came into being. And it's the Kimberley process is a certification scheme. So groups got together from all parts of the industry and suggested, or agreed in fact, that part of a UN resolution, packages of rough stones, so these are when they've come out of the ground, when they're still in the country where they've been found, would be certified. Somebody would go and look at them, agree that they were from an area that wasn't conflict, put them in a sealed, tamper-proof container or package, and then put a certificate with them as part of this process. Now, the only people that were involved in this were those countries that signed up for the scheme. So if you didn't sign up, you didn't have to agree with it anyway. But if you did sign up and agree with it, then the aim of this was that once your stones went over to the cutters and the sorters and the buyers, they would know, at least at the stage of the export, that when they imported stones, they were importing stones and getting stones that were conflict-free. However, more hitting the news, dirty diamonds, because Naomi Campbell, she received some diamonds that have been proven now to be from conflict area. War crimes, Sierra Leone, Charles Taylor was from Liberia. She gave her evidence and she basically said, I didn't know, they were just dirty stones. So that's why they became known as the dirty stones or the dirty diamonds. More recently, Mugabe with the Marangi diamond fields in southwest Zimbabwe. What happened there was that even though Zimbabwe was signed up for the scheme, and it was known what was happening at this time with the Marangi diamond fields, was that Mugabe went in, he decided he was taking over with his soldiers. He employed Chinese torture experts to train his troops, and this is known. And in the newspapers they had pictures, there's been videos, there's been interviews of low-flying aircraft where the people within the aircraft from Mugabe's army used machine guns to machine gun local people who were down there, the artisanal miners. They then set dogs on them as well to try and get them off the land so that they could take over, put soldiers, their own soldiers in place and take over the diamond mines. So this was all known, this was in the papers, this was in the media. The Kimberley process didn't immediately stop the ban. When they did, they tried to do a few things, but they didn't stop it. So then there was, well, if the Kimberley process is going to allow diamonds from Marange to reach the marketplace, then what trust have we got left in the process? And this word, a mockery, I heard several people mention, well, this is a mockery. I'd had a meeting in the House of Commons about conflict diamonds, and it all seemed very positive. And then when this came out, the MPs just turned around and went, well, what's the point? What's the point if you can't trust a government and you can't trust the politicians? And this is politicians saying to me, only if you can't trust the politicians, you know. Who can you trust? Car salesmen, of course. And it was so bad that even Global Witness, I don't say even Global Witness because they were in there, they withdrew in 2012 as an official observer. They lost faith, they lost confidence. There's a lot more about that, and I do recommend this book if you want to read it. It's by Greg Campbell, called Blood Diamonds, and it tells the story mainly of Sierra Leone, but it gives a lot of facts and figures. It's a very easy read in that it's very well written. It's an easy story to read through, but at the same time, it's a very difficult read, one of the most difficult books that I read, because once you've read it, you won't be able to forget it. It's absolutely appalling, some of the atrocities that were happening. And it goes on. Central African Republic. I've actually put these pictures in here, a picture of a map and a picture of a lovely elephant, because looking through the papers, looking on the internet, contacting people, the photographs are so horrendous that I could not have put them on display for a public audience. Again, they were banned, Kimberley process, export banned, but then 2016, only 3 years later, they decided, oh, well, let's have 5 areas that, yeah, they're okay, they seem to be all right. But I'm sure you're aware, and this one I've put in here, they're meeting in Antwerp. They're meeting in Antwerp this week, and I haven't heard yet the response, what's come out of that. Some of you might already know. But the reason this goes on, diamonds are small, they're easily to transport, they're very easily to smuggle. How do you know where they've come from? Can you tell if it's from the Congo? Can you tell if it's from Botswana? In some cases, you can. Some of the scientists now are working with oxygen isotopes and various other things, and they will tell you that they can tell you this is from Zimbabwe, this is from South Africa somewhere else, this is from, and sometimes they can tell you the mine that it's from. In a similar way that when I was doing a lot of work with emeralds, emeralds have inclusions, and with emerald inclusions that form within, sometimes they call them flaws. If you were buying an emerald, you'd say, well, this isn't a good one because it's got flaws. But if you're looking at it as a scientist or a gemologist, those inclusions can tell you sometimes not just which country that emerald has come from, but also which mine that emerald has come from. And there are scientists who have the right equipment now to be able to do that for some of the diamonds, but not all the diamonds. So how do you know? On the picture before, that was just moving through from a rough crystals on the left there, diamond crystals, through to the cut stone at the end. Now, Leif mentioned blockchain technology. Again, a very recent, just this last month, Gem Fair, De Beers Group Initiative have made this announcement that they're aiming to create a secure and transparent route to the market for ethically sourced artisanal and small-scale mined rough diamonds. Now, this is a change for De Beers because De Beers have been associated in the past with large-scale mining and with exploration and export of rough material. But here they're looking at rough diamonds at small scale, but taking them right the way through to the end of that supply chain. So far through that they're looking through right the way through all the way through to the cutting, and then they're keeping the certificate and the way through. So Leaf did explain I thought very well and very concisely of how it's these blocks of data, public ledger, secured using cryptography, which means that the person who's moving the stone on can't do anything wrong. They can't make it up. It will go through a process. It will go from step to step along the records. And it will have to fit with the protocol, the system, how the those things, how they fit together, all the mathematics and the computer programming behind the system. Algorithms, those. So they're set up, but they're set up by the different platforms with their own secure system behind it. So as a member of the public, I wouldn't understand how it's been set up, but I would only be able to trust that they've set it up in such a way that forgers, hackers can't get into the system and change everything or anything. This is already being used. Bitcoin is one, but also these smart contracts, banks changing money backwards and forwards. What De Beers is saying as well is at the end of this system, when you've gone all the way through the blockchain, the diamond that you have at the end will be a lasered diamond. It will have a laser imprinted on it, a little mark. And at the moment, you can get diamonds already that say Forever Mark. So they'll have the Forever Mark trademark there on the diamond. But it's so small, a 5,000th the width of a human hair, that on these, you can't see it clearly with your own eyesight. You do need to have some sort of magnification. There are other diamond companies that do have quite obvious laser markings on the table. I'll show you those in a minute, or the sides of the stones. But with the laser marking, they're saying beautiful, rare, and responsibly sourced. And already these forever marks are available in nearly 2,000 outlets around the world. But what Forever Mark does is it'll tell you it's a De Beers diamond, and it'll tell you it's come from one of the De Beers mines, or the De Beers have brought it in and then given it the mark. But what you might not know is which mine did it come from. And you have to trust that they haven't added in any other stones. Canada Mark, with their laser marking, I'm only just mentioning a few because I know of them, is another trademark owned by Dominion Mines, and this is up in the north. Lynn, do you want some water?
No, fine.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. So Canada Mark, they mark their stones, and they mark it along this area, which is called the girdle. On a gemstone, this is looking sideways. So instead of looking down on your ring as you usually would, which would be looking down on the table, you're looking at the side. So this is the shape of the stone as it's faceted, as it's cut. You've got the table at the top. The top part is the crown. The bottom part is the pavilion. And then the widest part around here is the girdle. And it's the girdle where the laser is marking. Here's the laser marking. So it's got the Canada Mark logo. The mine, they have two mines. And then the number. And the number will refer to the certificate. And the certificate will also look at that diamond, and it will be identified on the 4 C's, which I'm sure you've heard, with colour and clarity, carat, etc. Now, De Beers have decided something else as well just recently, and this is this last week. They're going to start making diamonds, synthetic diamonds. Now, synthetic means that it's got the same chemistry, carbon, C, and therefore it's got the same optical physical properties of natural diamond. They're made in laboratories, and they're going to bring them on the market. And they're going to bring them on the market fairly soon, but they're going to do it with this blockchain technology. So they're going to try and say, well, we've followed these through, and, sorry, not the blockchain. They're going to say, we've made these in the lab, and these are not the blockchain, but we can maybe put them on blockchain as already synthetic ones and follow them through, or we can just bring them straight out into the shop with the laser marking, and that'll show you that they've been made in the laboratory. The good thing about this is there are already some stones out there that are synthetic, which you can sometimes tell apart. You or I, looking at them you wouldn't be able to, but usually a gemologist with the right equipment can look into some of these synthetics and sort them out from the naturals. But what does that mean? If you're making diamonds for the future, what about those people who are the miners? Is it going to put them out of a job? How many of them will no longer have a livelihood? And then it's weighing up this balance of people having a good time, a good livelihood, or even a livelihood in these artisanal mines. Or what if synthetic diamonds take off and people decide they never want to buy another natural diamond again? Well, I used to have discussions, talks. Have we got any Americans here today? It may not be the same now, but quite a few years back, I was discussing antiques with a group of Americans, and I said to them, if you had the choice of buying an antique, scratched, not in top condition, or a really super reproduction, perfect, but you know it's not an antique, which one would you buy? And nearly all of them would go for the reproduction. This is things may change, and obviously they're individuals, but the group that I had at that time said they would go for the reproduction. I then said, well, with an emerald, you saw that beautiful emerald I showed at the beginning. Usually emeralds have many flaws, they have many inclusions, sometimes it's called a jardin, a garden. There's so much going on in there, which on a magnifying glass is just a whole new world. So with an emerald, I showed them some emeralds. Which would you prefer? Would you buy the one that is natural, millions of years old, formed in the earth, or would you go for this one, which is actually perfectly clear, but it's a synthetic, it's made in the laboratory? And many of them said, well, I want the one that's clear, because nobody else will know that it's been made in a laboratory. And then I said to them, I talked to them about what jewellery they have, and quite a few of them have had their jewellery, all their jewellery, put in a safe, put in a bank, or put in a safe in a deposit. So when they go out, they don't wear their real jewels. They go out wearing either synthetic, which have the same chemistry, or imitation, something like a CZ, a cubic zirconia, which looks a bit like a diamond, or even more sparkly than a diamond sometimes, or even sometimes artificial, made of glass. So what they're wearing is saying, this is what I'm wearing, but you know that I've got the real stuff in the safe. Or just, actually, I haven't got anything, I'm just wearing this because I know that you'll think that I've got it in the safe. So, where do you go with the synthetics? So it's something to think about in the future. How will this affect the whole of the jewellery? How will this affect the ethical side, the fair trade side? And you can make rubies, you can make sapphires, they're actually easier. Very simple chemistry. You just add your aluminium, Al, with your oxygen O, heat it up, add some colouring, chromium, vanadium, if you want to go ruby. That's the red for chromium and vanadium, the CR, the VM. Or FeTi, that's iron and titanium, if you want to go blue and have a sapphire. It's been done for years. 1902, Frenchman, Auguste Bernoulli. He found the process worked. All he did was he put the ingredients there, powdered ingredients in the top, heat it up, blowtorch, only need 2,000 degrees centigrade, which for a chemist isn't really, really high. And it melts, drips down, drops onto this pedestal, which moves around, and as that rotates, the melted material just gradually cools and forms a ball. The ball gradually grows. When it's grown, you chop it in half and then break it in half and then facet it to make it look like a ruby. And it looks very similar to a natural ruby. And you cannot tell them apart unless you've got a magnifier. Generally, you only need usually times 10. Sometimes even with a good light, you can tell one from another. But I won't go into all of that now. But you can do other colours as well. And at the bottom there, Padparadscha, pinkish orange, using manganese, Mn for manganese. So you can make different colours of gemstones. One of the problems I had in working with Parliament another problem I had with working in Parliament, is there are so many different acronyms, so many different groups of people working in diamonds, because it's complex, because you've got miners, engineers at one end, and you've got jewellers, marketers, salespeople at the other. So these are just a few, but I mentioned the CRS at the top because it's become a bit of a tick box for some companies. They've got to be seen to be doing something. So they just put money in to build a school somewhere, or they put money in to build a hospital. They don't really get involved with the process. If you don't remember anything, do remember this. More than 100 million people worldwide are dependent on ASM, employed directly or indirectly. More than 100 million people. And that goes through the whole stage, miners, cutters, polishers, etc. Artisanal mining, the second biggest employer on the planet. So you might ask, well, who is the biggest employer? American Ministry of Defense. And this is what it looks like on the ground. A lot of it is very traditional, panning for gold or digging in the dust, digging in the dirt for the diamonds or the gems. Sri Lanka, the island of gemstones, no mechanical methods allowed. Generations of Sri Lankans working, understanding how to find the stones. And I always think of them as sort of sitting in the back, going out the back garden, digging a little hole, looking for something, but very well organised. 1948, I mentioned that one. Stuart's here. He's got a display outside. A company with conscience, which I love. But what's so good is that Stuart is one of those people who, he owns a mine, but he goes out, he visits it. He goes up regularly, he meets them, he sees what they need. And not only out there, and on the last one you've got the whole group of them, but also doing other things, working for other charities as well. The Candy Kids. I said triathlon earlier, but I've been told it was a mini triathlon. But I was still very impressed. So doing something, making a step in the direction. You might say, well, it's just one person with one company with one mine. But to me, that is ethical, that is fair, and that is something that really should be encouraged. And I think it's great. And also we have Kathy, who's come along today with some Fairtrade gemstones. And again, knowing that route from mine to market, watching it every step of the way and having trust and confidence. And they'll be here at the end for you to have a chat with them. So, summarising, following that transparency and traceability, gold, I mentioned Greg Valeri, and in Colombia, fair trade, fair mind. With diamonds, I mentioned Canada Mark, Forever Mark. Forever Mark, though, it doesn't necessarily trace back to the mine. And the Kimberley, again, doesn't necessarily trace back to the mine. Colour gemstones, this is where Kathy works with the Columbia Gem House, following that supply route. So finally, transparency, traceability, the two T's. But for me, there's also the third, trust. First of all, ask yourself these questions, or if you go to a jeweller, ask a jeweller. If you meet gemologists, ask gemologists what they think about it. Is it fair trade? Is it fair trade, as in the trademark? And do I know the difference? Well, I hope you all do now. Do you have evidence and do you trust it to see whether it's fair trade or fair trade? And is it transparent and traceable? Do you have the evidence? And do you trust that evidence? So I'll leave with you with those questions on there to think about, but I'll also now have Leaf up to be in charge if there are any other questions. Yep.
Thank you very much, Callie, for an eye-opening presentation. I would like to think everybody in the room would stop and ask a few questions about provenance before purchasing their next piece of jewellery. We'll open up the floor for questions. We've got a bit of time before we can go outside for drinks. So do we have any questions in the room for Callie? We've just got a mic coming to you, if you could hold off so everyone can hear you.
Hi, Chirag. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very, very useful. I had a question on your anecdotal experience with the Americans, which is basically, the change in attitude you're seeing with the younger people.
Yep.
That
millennials.
Millennials,
Yep.
exactly. That they don't necessarily appreciate the fact that it's natural and that it's sort of more moving towards synthetic, if you
Yes.
say so. Where do you see that going, and do you think, given that synthetic stones don't have the fact that they might be ethical or unethical, do you think that might also play a role in the emergence of synthetic stones?
I think with the synthetic and the millennials and the changing attitudes, the examples that I gave was my personal anecdote with people a few years back of a certain age. So definitely not millennials. But I think the way that it's going, it's for my age group, I don't know all of you, but it's very much about emotion still. It's about knowing, I feel very, very much that if a stone has been in the ground, it's millions of years ago, millions of years old, it's been formed in the ground, it's natural. To me, that means something. And I understand with youngsters coming through, it's much more about how it looks, or what it's worth, or who it's made by, if it's branded. But I think there'll always be some people who still retain that feeling of something from the earth, something that you can mine. I think it would be a great shame if there was no mining. 100 million people, not all of them miners, obviously, but it would change a great deal. Now, whether you think that would be for the best or not, whether that would be ethical to put that in process and actually encourage that, I think you would need to have something else for all those people to do, because there are so many and they are just scraping a living, they are just surviving. If you can make, my view is if you can make their livelihoods better, and if you can improve the way that they use the environment so that they don't cause so much pollution or don't destroy the environment as much, that would be the way I'd like to see it going. However, I'm not able to influence these youngsters coming through. So we shall see.
And just a very follow-up question. What is the pricing difference in natural and synthetic stones? What do you see in terms of
There was an article recently, an announcement recently, where De Beers said that if it's a natural, and there've been different things have been said. So some have said if it's 4,500 for a carat, which is 0.2 grams of a natural, then the equivalent would be maybe only $800 for a synthetic. Now that actually means nothing, really, because of the 4 Cs. So if I say to you, I've got a 1 carat diamond, it's worth such and such. But if it was the same 1 carat and it was synthetic, it's worth something else. A different 1 carat diamond, natural, might be worth a lot more or a lot less, depending on those 4 Cs, the colour, the clarity, and so on. So those numbers actually at the moment don't mean anything, and it's not until they start to put some out on the market and you just start to see what will people pay for them that you'll see where the selling point for the synthetics will be. There are synthetics on the market already. Now, this isn't new, bringing synthetics to the market. What's new is De Beers suddenly coming in marketing synthetics and using blockchain technology to try and increase confidence in what they're doing. Tony. Sorry, I should take this.
It's all right.
The role of artisans, it looks rather disturbing. All those people struggling to find to make a living, presumably from the remains of the rock going down into the valleys and sorting it out like the old gold rush in California. And don't you think it's rather wrong to sort of encourage those people to involve themselves in such a business where they're not going to make any commercial progress? And that begs the question, where do they sell their gold, their gems and their gold? Do they have to sell? Do they sell it back to the main producers at a lower price?
On the artisanal miners, generally what happens is they will sell it to the next person. They will sell it up and sell it up. And the people going up, the middlemen, are the ones who make the money. The ones at the beginning are not making much money at all. But it varies. I've just given a couple of examples because of the time constraints, but it's a whole thing. In different countries, the miners are in different situations, and different countries use their resources in different ways. So in Botswana, a good example where money is being used to help the communities, health, wealth, all happiness, whereas in some other countries where the governments aren't so good, governments are the ones who are benefiting. So in those areas, although people are finding, and the country has wealth, you know, where they have minerals, if the government treated it properly, they wouldn't need money being sent in. They wouldn't need fair trade premiums. They wouldn't need anything if their own people looked after them better, in my view.
But the word artisan sounds very professional, and but it looks to me as if it's poor people who are going to be permanently in poverty, enriching people above them.
In many cases, that is the case. The vast majority are in poverty.
Yes.
But for many of them, that is their only option. So if you take that away, there's nothing else for them to do. If you could, a bit like the miners in Wales, I suppose, is if you...
I was just thinking that.
I was just thinking with the miners in Wales, you could say, well, all they do is mine coal, right? If they stop mining coal, they'll all be out of work, which was the case. But actually, if you look at Wales now, you haven't got so many slag heaps. You know, it's better. So, in a way, I would love to agree with you, but I think the time scale and the complexity and the differences in different countries. In some areas, the licenses are run very well, and the people are looked after very well, and they have a good life. In other areas, it is absolutely appalling. It's atrocious the way they work.
Kelly, can I
But,
possibly
yes,
add
of
a
course,
point?
please do,
Because
please do.
I work for Extension. We do a lot of work with the major mining companies, including De Beers. And a number of the major mining companies, where diamonds or any other commodity, they have programs to work with the local communities and the governments to try and provide either better working conditions or alternative, education and alternative resources, so that there is an alternative livelihood option for the people. But if you consider that you're in the middle of nowhere in Sri Lanka's a bad example, but what's a good example? Say Tanzania. You come from a family that has lived off the land, subsistence farming, and suddenly there's a diamond activity nearby. You are naturally going to, and perhaps you left school after primary school because you didn't see any. You had to go and get work in order to feed the family. Then you are likely to go and try and get some work there to improve your income.
Why don't those governments who have companies like De Beers, why don't they insist those companies invest in the training of those people? It's a way of investing in the country.
Well, they do, but as Callie pointed out, we're talking about vast numbers of people over vast areas of land.
It's a vast amount of money they're making.
Yeah, and it works well in some areas, and in other areas it doesn't. But I'm hoping that by talking about the fair trade and the ethical, that raises the issue, so more people will actually ask these questions, and that will gradually work back through the system, so that they will have a better life. And where a mine is coming to its end, for example, that they will make sure there are things in place for that community, so the community can find other ways. And I mentioned Wales. You know, when the coal stops, you need something else for them. When a steel company stops, you need something else. And it's that forward planning which isn't working very well everywhere, but in some areas where you have the right people in the right place, it's getting there. And I'm very positive about the future.
I hope so. Can you just answer a technical question? Can diamond cutters, say in Hatton Garden, can they distinguish where a diamond comes from?
Diamond cutters in Hatton Garden, where if there are any, most of the cutters are actually in Antwerp and other places.
Yes.
It's not their job to, really. So I would doubt that many of them would spend the time trying to do that. They receive a bundle. If they receive a bundle, what happens is different countries as well would like different things. So it may be that in India they're wanting a bundle of small stones. In America they might want large stones. So at some point these stones will get mixed and matched, and there might be somebody who is particularly good working with equipment, laser cutting, for example, to work with small stones, so the stones go that way. So keeping a bundle of stones from one particular mine to one particular place. But just looking at them without gemological expertise, I don't know many cutters, but Nigel might know this, where I think very few cutters would actually even ask that question. They would just be trying to get the best from that stone.
So they wouldn't have an input into the Kimberley process to make sure...
At that stage, it's already gone past the Kimberley process. The Kimberley process is talking about the rough material when it comes out of the ground and it's exported. If you think of it as an export-import certificate, that's what it's doing. Once it gets on to the sorters and the cutters, it's gone beyond the Kimberley process.
Sounds like there's a lot to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got time for probably one or maybe two more questions. So this lady here.
Forgive my naivety on this whole subject, but is it not possible to have legislation that says you're not allowed to cut something unless it's got or sell something on, unless it's got the certificate proving that it's appropriate? So you actually go from the top down to say, I can't work with this, I can't sell this unless I have a certain certificate, so that you sort of stamp it out rather than assuming that the consumer is going to control that process. Just have a law. I mean,
Kathy,
laws, that's what they're for. Yeah.
could you repeat that? Because Kathy's from the Diamond Bourse, so she knows what they get up to there.
I was just wondering, rather than relying on the consumer to consume ethically, can we not simply have a law that says you're not allowed to cut a diamond that doesn't have an appropriate certificate that says it's been sourced responsibly? So you go from the top down and say, you know, from
And
well, who
enforce it.
implements the law generally? I mean,
the cutters, the miners who are mining it, or the cutters who are cutting it. The majority of the cuttings done in India, and some still in Antwerp, not a lot. You would have to see if they would implement it. At the moment, with the diamonds, I'm obviously selling the Canada mark, which is Dominion, which can be tracked all the way back to Canada. All of that product is cut in India. And they have a third-party chain which will go and check that what comes out of Canada in its sealed box is bought by the cutting manufacturers, and there's many, many of them, that they are cutting that specific rough. Now, for instance, when we buy those stones, we know they come from Canada, and we can put our hand on our heart and say, yes, that is what it is. Recently, what I have found is that they're also naming other countries where they've been cut, such as Sierra Leone and other major Canadian mines as well. What they then do, it's up to people like me to say what you're buying is the genuine article and we can prove it. But it does come down to the man on the street who then has to say, we want to know. And to go back to your situation about the millennials, in actual fact, they are the ones beginning to ask, because they're being taught ethics and fair trade in schools. They have fair trade and ethical lessons to do with coffee, tea, whatever. And it's that younger generation, not our generation, but the younger generation that will implement these changes eventually.
If you also bear in mind that the governments, a lot of them are bringing the cutting in country, so they want to vertically integrate the industry so that they're retaining some of that, the profit through the value chain. And the governments would have to enforce it, but the governments are gaining as well. And they are limited in resources and limited in their tenure in government. So they want to maximise their value gain whilst they're in position. So the miners aren't necessarily the bad guys. No. There's a whole bunch of different stakeholders at play.
It's like De Beers live where they're, cutting mainly in Botswana
Yeah.
and India, and they're putting a great deal back into the country, and the government, like Liv says, have a huge percentage in that as well.
but if the UK, for example, wanted to do something like a diamond tax,
Sorry.
so if the UK, for example, wanted to implement a diamond tax, for example, every diamond that comes in to the UK to be sold into the UK that's traded in the UK in any way, shape or form has to pay a tax. I think the government get very good at working out ways to collect those taxes in the same way as they're very good at collecting VAT.
Or would it encourage smuggling?
But that's illegal as well, right?